So welcome everyone to the next session in the Ethics of Digital Literacy webinar series for Drew Teach and the Drew Writing Project and Digital Literacies Collaborative. I'm very excited tonight to be inviting the authors of chapter 8, I think it was, in the Ethics of Digital Literacy book. We have with us Aaron and Anna, and I'm going to turn this over to them to let them introduce themselves and share with us what they've been writing and thinking about.
Great.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Aaron Gierhart, and I'll, I guess, introduce the session. Four of us co-wrote the chapter, and I do want to give all four people their due credit, but the title of the chapter, Fostering Cosmopolitan Dispositions Through Collaborative Classroom Activity. I'm sorry, I can't, my chat window's hiding it. Yeah, activities, ethical digital engagement of K-12 learners. So my name is Aaron Gierhart. I'm a current third grade teacher at Millikan Elementary School, which is in Geneseo, Illinois. I'm also an adjunct professor at Illinois State, and next year I will be a professor in the LED program at Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia. Sarah Bonner couldn't be with us tonight because she's teaching a class at Illinois State tonight, but she's also a middle level language arts teacher in Hayworth, Illinois. Anna, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Anna Smith. I'm an assistant professor at Illinois State University currently.
And then we have Robin Seglum, who also couldn't be with us tonight, professor at Illinois State University, middle level literacy primarily, and that's right. Right, Anna?
Currently, we both do secondary, middle school, high school, literacies and technologies for both of us. That's kind of the areas that we work in.
Yeah. So yeah, there's our social media. If you are tweeting tonight or care to reach out or get in touch with us afterwards, that's how you can get in touch with all four of us that co-wrote the chapter.
I'll leave that up for a second before we dive in.
Yeah.
In case people are writing down. I see some nods. Okay.
Yes. Anna's probably the most active of us all on Twitter.
And I'm less active than I've ever been. So that might be saying something.
I think Dr. Turner's putting everyone's handle in the chat for reference as well.
Thanks. Yeah, and we also wanted to, I know that that in the past, some of you have been into some of these webinars before, you've been able to have some back and forth, put some questions in the chat, or just your experiences in the chat too, or had some time to join in and voice your questions or contributions. We're open to do that. We would like this to be very back and forth dialogic as much as we can tonight.
Yes.
So the four of us met at Illinois State University in some of the courses that we were, that Robin and I were teaching around technologies in our teaching and learning, and Aaron and Sarah are both classroom teachers full-time and doctoral candidates as well. And in those classes, one of the things that we kept emphasizing is that the digital age is really much more than just a bunch of new tools. There's a lot of great new tools that we can use, but it's actually brought us new ways of relating with other people and new ways of connecting with other people or disconnecting with other people as well. So some of the things that happen is we went from a connected world. We've always influenced each other across the whole globe, but this is a hyper-connected, there's all these new ways of connection that have happened. Arjun Appadurai talks about the flows of everything. There's flows of not just information, but flows of people moving and migrating at greater speeds, flows of commercial products that get moved across the world. Transportation has changed. So we've seen shifts more than just in the digital realm, that the digital realm has facilitated. And so we are, this is part of why we're so much more hyper-connected in this way. Another new thing that has changed when the digital age just came on, you would go online and then you would go offline. So you'd have your online presence, you'd wait for the little modem going, and then you'd be online and you might be in an online space, in an online group, and then you would go offline. And so you could really have this kind of separated space, but really now what happens online is the thing that's happening offline. There's really not a way, there's very few ways to have your offline world not influenced or be influencing your online world.
It's just messier.
It's
little
messier.
now. I mean, like a weird example in a way is that, so Anna was my professor for a couple of courses, and now she's on my dissertation committee, and we've written together. We talked about this recently. I think we've been physically in the same room maybe twice in the last 4 years. We've talked way more on an app like Zoom than we have in person. I get to see you in person next Monday, which is actually really cool.
It'll be like the third time in our lives.
Yeah.
That's true. And we've worked together now for 4 years.
Yeah.
Collaborating classes together.
Mm-hmm.
You were, TAing. I mean, yeah, that's a good example. I hadn't thought about that. So yes, the online world is just as real as the offline world, and it threads together. So this really brings us to a new ethical landscape, meaning a new way that we have to consider new relationships with people in a hyper-connected, flowing world. It's Kwame Appiah talks about how this is a world of strangers. It's actually a different shift societally than what human beings have been doing. He's a philosopher. What human beings have been doing, the way that they relate to each other now. He gives the example of when you go and buy a loaf of bread at the store, how many, now don't think about this too much because it might gross you out, but how many hands have touched that piece of bread before you put it in your mouth, right? You have to trust a whole array of people, other human beings you've never met, human beings that are from different communities, human beings that are from different places. This is what we mean by hyper-connected. That you put that bread in your mouth, you are trusting hundreds, thousands of people that you don't know, strangers. And so this is what we mean by a new ethical landscape. In ethics, meaning the way that we engage with each other. Or shorthand for that idea of the ways that we engage with each other. We have to really think about this new world that we're in. So when we participate online, which is most all the time, even if we're offline, we are participating in some way of what happens online. We are going to have things like unintended audiences for the things that we say or do. Interactive audiences that again, we may not even anticipate hearing back from someone. We're in this session, but who knows who's going to see this eventually if it sits online forever, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen with this. Yeah. This might be taken, also copied by somebody and re-edited and shift off to somewhere else, moved across to a different context that we don't even know about, and it's out of our control at that point. And so this also leads into this idea of this context collapse, that we're never in just one context anymore. This is the idea of being offline and online all the time. The word glocal comes up. Things are global and local often. We're often in more than one context or setting. Like I'm at home, I've got a babysitter in the other room, I've got my baby in the other room, but I'm here with you. Right? And so I'm actually negotiating multiple contexts right this second in thinking about what I'm saying to you and how we are interacting. And then more really obviously, we are also encountering different worldviews, unexpected perspectives, because we don't know what journeys other people have been on themselves. Even if we're all in the same room, right? All of the directions and the mobilities and the flows that have brought us all here intersecting in this, we might assume we have the same perspective on what's happening right now, but it's possible that we have very different perspectives on what's happening right now. So speaking of that, let's take a pause and check in with each other and just kind of think about this idea. And I'm hoping that some people will chime in. Thinking about, have you ever experienced, or have you heard somebody else experience this? Have you ever experienced a message that had an unexpected audience? Have you seen or heard or experienced when you had to adapt to a different context very quickly? Realized, oh, I'm not in this conversation, I'm in this conversation, right? Have you ever needed to entertain a new way of seeing something in order to understand it? So pause for a second, and then I hope some people can actually answer this together.
Yeah.
Kristen, how does that work? Do they like raise their hands or what's the best
Normally
way?
they're unmuting themselves and talking, so I think they're still pondering.
Okay, think about it. Think about it. Feel free. I just didn't know if we had to do anything on our end intentionally. So. Okay, so somebody typed one in.
Yeah, like the woman who applied for a job for a marketing firm, and she went to check their Facebook page and saw that they'd used a photo of hers to show what they were not looking for, went to the media, and then she got another job offer. That's kind of awesome. Oh, wow.
Wow. Wow. Talk about context collapse. Right?
Context detonation.
And audience, unintended audiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
A lot of times we hear about it that way, where it's like a punitive way, where the context collapsed in a bad way and there was some sort of negative consequences. But sometimes it can, I guess, lead to good things too.
That might be how we met, Kristen. It is messages maybe over Twitter, and then we started to interact in dialogue. Something like that, or online somewhere. I feel like is how we
And then
met.
I invited you to come speak at a conference. Yeah, it's pretty much how it works.
Yep. So there you go. There's a non-punitive example. Yeah, we had never met in person.
Right.
Yeah.
I see Charlotte chimed in on the chat. I've encountered this when I've had Facebook friends from work and they comment on something I've posted in an unexpected way. Then it becomes a work conversation when I wasn't intending it to be one. I've had that happen a lot. I actually work with my wife. My wife is the music teacher just down the hall from me. And she's having a baby in a month. And a lot of our personal life becomes work fodder very quick. So I can relate.
Yeah, Facebook or spaces like that, like you get all of the different communities you're a part of. The family, previous students, work people. It can get very, very crazy. Vanessa said, do you count the Australian guy from a small town who made his resume a YouTube video and got a job from a company in a big city? Exactly. Yeah, totally. This is the new way that a message, right? He made a YouTube video, his resume, and it got seen and picked up and went viral. There's the free hugs video that years ago went viral, and that became a thing in lots of cities, is giving out, hold a sign that says free hugs and giving out hugs. So
yeah,
cool. So we just wanted to connect with you and kind of raise these very practical examples of how this happens now, how this idea that we are in this new, more I guess not new, but more hyper-connected space that really requires us to think about our interactions with other people in some new ways. And we've been talking about this as we've been drawing from and learning from people who've been working with this idea of cosmopolitanism as a way of thinking about this new landscape. The idea of cosmopolitan, a cosmopolitan person is someone who has a wider range of interactions across different peoples of the world. Like the old definition was someone who had this eclectic kind of life where they were bohemian and saw lots of things. But it's adapted into this idea of cosmopolitanism as being a way of thinking about being part of this wider world than just the small community that we're in. So in a piece that I wrote with Glenda Hull a couple of years ago, we said that cosmopolitanism is the idea that one can become, indeed aspire to be, a citizen of the world, be able to embrace local ties and commitments, but also extend well beyond them, engaging a wider human community, even across divides of seemingly irreconcilable differences. I think that if we wrote this now, I might not use the word citizen, it's kind of a fraught term, but this idea that we are players in the world, that even if we're in a small community, rural community, we are actually active and interacting with people potentially across the world. And even if we're a child, there is also that, doesn't matter in terms of the age. Aaron's going to get into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
So Aaron, I think I'll jump back to you then.
Cool. Maybe I'll share my screen so I can control it for the next few. I think you need to. Yep. There we go.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And so when I read that quote that you and Glinda wrote a few years ago, it kind of I think it introduces the idea of like what our ethical responsibility is as educators with students, whether they're young students like the ones I'll talk with about that I work with, all the way up to the college level even. Um, I think all of those, the idea of being a citizen, and I agree, citizen can be a loaded term, but the idea of being a citizen in terms of having empathy and respect and responsibility for the way that you interact with others is incredibly important. And so some of the dispositions that we talk about here, and Anna and I got into a debate before this, if disposition's even the right word sometimes, because that can have a punitive measure in like education programs sometimes. But what we mean by that is the ethos that we wish for students to kind of take on when they're interacting with others in those on and offline contexts. And we find that we can foster a lot of these as educators through collaborative activities and collaborative opportunities. So the three dispositions that we speak towards in the chapter in the book, audience reflexivity. So when we say reflexivity, we mean considering what it is we're putting out there for the audience we intend, as well as the audiences that may pick up that message that we did not intend. Secondly, engaging across different contexts. And the idea of collapsing context kind of comes to mind here. And we'll get into a little bit about how one of our co-authors, Sarah, provides opportunities through a Genius Hour project for her middle schoolers to engage across contexts that they're genuinely interested in and want to kind of assume some of those new identities within their realms of interest, and getting mentors to help them bring them across those contexts quite literally. And then the third, hospitable transactions of perspective. So, we interact with people both on and offline, and we have no idea what their experiences and what their mindsets and opinions are. And Anna will speak to the project that her and Robin have done with some alt school high schoolers near Illinois State, and how they're able to hospitably, I guess, engage in a dialogue with others and share what their worldview was being in an alternative schooling setting. So we'll start with me first. So as I said before, I'm a third grade teacher currently. I taught first grade for 5 years. I've been third grade teacher for the last 6. And I think audience reflexivity is so important to start fostering very early on at the elementary age. I think I was talking with my students recently about how, Anna made the sound effect of a dial-up modem, and these students would have no idea what that sounds like, but I do, because we got the internet when I think I was in 6th grade when I first got online. But these students, they're almost connected when they come out the womb. My daughter is 3, and she's known how to swipe photos on my iPhone since she was like 1.5, maybe. And so it's just such a different level of connectivity than I ever had at that age. And the idea of being reflexive is, if we're interacting online and offline and in between those contexts at an early age, being mindful of what we're putting out there into the ether, as it were. And a really great quote that I picked up on here that's part of the chapter: as students communicate and publish online, they will undoubtedly have their intended audience in mind, but they must also consider unintended others that will also be privy to this content. So being mindful of what you put out there, because the internet is, we don't know what it's all going to come to, all this data someday, but very much it's written in ink, and it's going to be there, and it's going to be lasting, and others are going to see what we put out there. So as teachers, we need to be very intentional and design opportunities where students can quite literally be reflexive of what it is they're putting out there, and being intentional about giving them the opportunities to do that, have conversations around that. And that includes, me as the teacher with my students, but between the students themselves, as well as others that we engage with on an immediate level. And so I found through my experiences as an elementary teacher, having a lot of technology around, is that when I can foster collaborative learning opportunities, we can have more of those conversations. And we can work with students to be more reflective on the design choices they're making when they're creating and publishing content. And I have 2 examples from the chapter that I wrote about, as well as some examples that were not included in the chapter. The first, and this student was super thrilled to have his picture on here. He's very excited about it. We have a local government social studies unit in my 3rd grade room. And kind of a cap piece on the local government part was we actually got to interview a local alderman through Google Hangout which is an online video chat service. And so prior to the interview, we had to build up that content knowledge. So starting with where they were with their prior knowledge, we learned about things like how taxes work and what local services our taxes pay for, like education, fire department, community center, those types of things. We got into the idea of what a city council is and how our local city council has 4 wards and each has 2 aldermen that vote on decisions that are made, and they work with a city planner. And we learned through the interview that the mayor helps break ties because we happen to have an even number of aldermen in our community. And then I let them know, what are you concerned about, or what are you genuinely interested in about our local government and what's going on in our community, both now and in the future, because you get to actually talk to somebody who represents us on our local government. And they were so thrilled to be able to put together a list of questions. So we worked as a class, and the kids brainstormed questions, and we kind of combined them and looked at what was similar and how we might word them to be intentional and respectful of the alderman's time when we spoke to him. We requested permission before we started the video chat to record and publish the interview on YouTube, because what's great about Google Hangout is it's integrated with YouTube. You can broadcast live to YouTube, and then it's archived, much like what I assume Dr. Turner is going to do with this webinar when we're done tonight. And then after the students were finished, and they actually got to, as you can see in the photo, they literally got to sit in my chair and ask him the questions and look him in the eye. And it was just so fun. They took it very seriously. Everyone was very respectful in this interaction. And then afterwards, because we had that archive video, you can see here that my students publish formal writing pieces on Blogger, and they were able to actually, so here's the video. I can maybe share just a smidge of it here.
I don't think we can hear it. We can see it, but I don't believe we can hear it.
Can you guys can't hear the audio of it?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. If you would have heard the audio, it would have been the students asking him a question. I think it was about local taxes or something like that. But anyways, afterwards, they were able to refer back directly to the interview, which was archived on YouTube. And they wrote an opinion piece, which happened to line up at the time with what we were doing in our language arts curriculum about being an alderman. And based on what they had learned about the work that he did on a weekly basis for our community, would they want to do that? Did they think it would be easy or hard? So you can see what Bobby wrote here. In my opinion, I think that being an alderman would be hard. For example, it would be hard to keep track of what we need to fix, tear down, and the budget. Also, some things might be really expensive. I feel like new pipes would be expensive, and also electric towers, because I think he was saying how they were about to renovate some of the sewage pipes in the city when we interviewed him a couple years ago for this. Another thing would be keeping track of when you have meetings for new laws, like, for example, having a law for having up to 5 chickens per farm, because one of my students tried to have a chicken coop in his backyard in town, and I think he was told that it was against the law. So he actually asked the alderman about that, because we're a rural community. This is why I think being an alderman would be hard. And what I love about this too, not so much the audience reflexivity, but the idea of considering other contexts, other people's perspectives and work and things like that. I thought it was just a really cool writing opportunity. Secondly, another project I wrote about in the chapter was in a unit about natural resources and being mindful of our impact on the environment. The students created a project proposal. So each group created a proposal on Adobe Spark, which is a free open source tool that you can use online for a lot of different purposes. You can use it for some very basic graphic design, as well as creating videos and slideshows, as well as kind of scrollable web pages with multimedia, which is what I'll share an example of in just a moment. So we worked in teams on this, and I really like the idea of working on a team, because they have to come up with a common message that they want to sell the class on. And they all voted on each other's projects. They couldn't vote for their own. So they had to vote for one other group's project. And whichever one had the most votes, we actually went out and did that project as a class before the end of the year. They had to consider their own beliefs and opinions, as well as those of their group mates, and kind of design something where they were honoring that reflexivity amongst themselves, but also being mindful to present their opinion in a convincing and respectful way to their classmates who were ultimately going to have to choose whether to vote on what they had created, their proposal or not. So thinking, and it's just such a great way to think about how the design choices we make, how they might be perceived by others because they had an actual audience of the other groups that may or may not vote for them. So this is what the project, an example of what one of the projects looked like. So this was Recycle More. And you can see that they're able to put together the images and the text. You can get YouTube videos and links and things, but it all comes together pretty slick, and it's very user-friendly at the elementary age. We think we should recycle more. We think our class should go out and recycle to help the environment. Because some people think that you can't reuse things. So we think our class should recycle more. They have all these examples of horrible littering and things. Look at all these that you can recycle. We will need, so that I asked them in the project to explain kind of the nuts and bolts of how the project would work. We will need 13 plastic bags and group people in groups of 2. We'll ask Miss Paula, that's one of our custodians, for trash bags. Have everyone group up in groups of 2 and have all the kids go on a recycling hunt. These are 3 ways our project helps the environment. And I love the like breakfast clubby picture they picked in the background here. More people will recycle. If we don't, it won't be good for our environment. Also, we will use lots of trees and resources that we didn't recycle. Then we won't have oxygen because trees give us oxygen. Landfills will not be so big because we will have most of that stuff recycled. So they're drawing upon a lot of the content that we discussed and worked with prior to this activity in class, some of the lessons we had done and discussions we had prior to actually brainstorming ideas and creating these projects. We will not have to use a lot of resources because we will already have renewed paper and end up saving some trees. For our project, we will hand out plastic bags and have everyone go out and pick up trash. And you can see they kind of put like an inspirational why we should recycle video at the end. When people watch this video, they will know how important it is to recycle. We think we should help the environment by recycling because it is so important to us. And so, once everyone was finished with these, we sat down as a class and viewed them together. And then we took a vote. And I believe like a project similar to that, I think was the one that won, where we went out and we picked up trash together and they felt like they had a sense of ownership in that project, which was cool too. But again, going back to the idea of audience reflexivity, they had to consider the message they were putting out there, negotiating amongst themselves. And a lot of that, my role as the teacher becomes more of a role of a facilitator in that part, because I'm helping them negotiate disagreements or questions about how they might best present the content and the message that they're trying to get out there in a way that's convincing and relatable. Before I move on to, I guess, other things I wanted to share, I wanted to stop and see if there were any questions from viewers before we continue. Vanessa asks, are young students really able to understand what they're doing online? I think that they probably understand the idea of what they're creating and that people see it. As far as the idea of that message going to unintended audiences, it's something that I try to introduce, but I don't know conceptually how much they really understand that at a younger age. Maybe if they've had older siblings that have had experiences with that positively or negatively.
I'm going to put in here a link to a blog post. I was working with a group of 5th graders that we were talking specifically about audiences and how we wanted to think about audience no matter what we were writing, and then what changes when we're thinking about audience online. And they surprised me what they already knew about engaging online. And their big takeaway as a class, they talked about, and this was years ago, it was say true things, that's what you needed to do when you were online. And this was way before fake news became a thing. Yeah. And bots became a thing. I mean,
Still
this
very
was
applicable today.
Very fascinating that they already were keyed into this idea that what you represent online needed to be, yeah. But let me link that right now too.
Thank you for sharing that in the chat. And then Vanessa, you also asked, do you talk with them about trolls and negative comments? And yeah, we definitely do. Let me actually click on the example of our blogging that we do. I know that the focus of our chapter was more on collaboration, and when they're blogging, it's more of an independent activity. But then again, the idea there is that it's not just this piece of writing that they're going to hand in to me. I'll slap a grade on, send home. It may or may not make it on the fridge. Other people may or may not see it. Whereas when we're blogging, we see that classmates can respond to what we're writing. So that piece of writing kind of stays alive even after it's turned in, quote unquote. I have a lot of grandparents and students' parents, family members from out of town that will chime in on kids' blog posts. So they have that audience. And when we go to start commenting on each other's blogs, what I mentioned is, there's kind of two criteria. One, it does need to be respectful, because I kind of frame it as there's enough bad things out in the world and online. Let's try to put positivity out there. And if you have questions for each other, that's a great place for that as well. But also we want our comments to be something of substance, where we're mentioning something specific about what was written or presented, not just, hey, cool, bro, because that doesn't really foster an ongoing conversation or opportunities to engage, ethically in an online sphere for these young students. So Paisley on her blog here, as you can see, wrote about her favorite place that she went to over the summer was Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And she goes on at great length to describe it using sensory details, and then kind of follows up with, I like the way you described how you put salty, creamy onion pasta. And so she's giving Paisley a compliment, but she's also being very specific with that compliment. And I'm assuming if Paisley had latched on that comment, she would have replied. Maybe she just mentioned to Kenna in class, hey, thanks for saying that. But I try to foster positive communication so they at least have the good example of that. And if they post things that are inappropriate on each other's blogs from time to time, we discuss those and talk about how, I could screenshot that and I could email it in 2 seconds, and that would be terrible. And I don't want people to think things about you that you're negative like that, because I know you're not. And we have to think about how we made others feel and who else could see what we put out there. And you kind of take those as conversations. Kristen, we are in a Google school. That's why I use Blogger, because it's integrated with their Google Chromebooks and their Google accounts. So it's very easy to create and maintain those. And I'm the admin on all their blogs. Did you have to get them to allow Blogger? Do you mean the school district, Kristen?
Yeah, I just wonder whether that was an app already enabled or whether you had to advocate for it.
It was more or less enabled. There's not a lot of the Google products that are blocked for us. It wasn't so much me advocating to enable the technology as advocating that I be able to use it and that the kids could handle it and it go well. My principal was very supportive. Our tech team was supportive. It's more when you tell parents, hey, your student's going to blog for the first time and they're going to put stuff out there. And that is met with fear sometimes. And there are a few students' blogs who I have private. So it's just me as the admin. I can see it, the student can see it, and the parent can see it, and that's it. And, that does cut down on the amount of commenting and the social aspects of it between the students themselves, because if it's that private, even classmates can't see it. But if that's what makes those parents comfortable and these students are still able to participate and get, 90% of the experience, that's a good thing too, in my opinion. But yeah, it definitely took some advocating. And, I've been doing the blogging with them for about 3 years now. And so at this point, I'm kind of like, oh, that's the guy, that's the tech guy that's working on his doctorate. And I think there's a little more trust built there once you kind of establish a line of success with it, and where kids are excited to come to your class because they know they get to do that. And then the parents get more on board because they've heard from others that it went well and it wasn't scary. So yeah, that's that. Let me jump back into the slideshow.
That I just really quickly, I threw up another blog post. It actually kind of introduces this idea of cosmopolitanism as well, that might be helpful to reference, but it all is around questions that parents had about having students have email accounts or Blogger accounts, or that conversation. So the best part of that blog post is actually the comments. So a lot of parents have actually commented and continued that conversation and worked out. There's a great conversation there of parents understanding, why do we want young people in a scaffolded way to interact online?
Yeah.
so that's another, I think the comments are actually the most interesting thing about that link that I just shared. But also going back to the issue on trolls, I saw that question on the other sheet. Yeah. I haven't either I haven't really dug in either with young children and that conversation, but I know some people who have. I'm going to be able to remember that, and I'll post a response there in that question answer sheet.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on that, as far as kind of making the parents have a comfort level with it. I've had some really rich conversations with parents, and a lot of the fear was, this is new. We don't know who could see this. There's a risk there. And I let them know that I moderate all the comments. So I get an email prompt every time a comment's posted, whether it's one of my students or otherwise. And I always frame it as, they're going to be interacting online when they're older. They're going to have these experiences. Why not do it in a safe space where it's very moderated now, where they can build that, not only that confidence for themselves to be able to put things online that they're proud of, that have meaning, but they're also going to have experiences with interacting with others when they otherwise wouldn't have. And I think it just builds a certain sense of being able to negotiate those interactions at a young age. And as a parent, that's something that, eventually I would like my daughter to build that understanding of what those interactions can look like and what they should and should not look like. Super quick before we jump into the other two parts of the chapter, just because I see we're in the second half hour already. So I'll try to be brief. My students, much like what I'll share about what Sarah Bonner has done with her middle school students, we have a very modified Genius Hour project we do on Friday afternoons where they're researching online about a big question that genuinely interests them. They work in teams or individually, and they're able to publish original content based on what they're learning. A lot of my students enjoy podcasting, and it's not podcasting in the sense that you can find it in a podcast feed like Spotify or Apple or things like that, but they record using a free app called Vocaroo. It's at vocaroo.com. I'll put it in the chat in just a little bit. But then we save those files in Google Drive and link them to their research site. So here's an example of one. And how this, for me, relates to audience reflexivity is the idea of, you could get on a podcast and literally just read off of a piece of paper. But if someone's going to actually listen to this, we want it to be rather entertaining and to sound like more of a conversation while others get to be a fly on the wall. I'm going to unplug my earbuds and see if maybe everyone can hear the content this way.
Hi, guys.
Anna, are you able to hear that?
This is our third episode, and this is Paisley Arnold. And
are you able to hear that audio, Anna?
Yes.
Okay, good.
And Ellie Jackson, and we're doing. And like, I have no idea who that is, but whatever. Anyway, Earth is almost 3 times bigger than Mercury.
So I think you can get the sense of their personality there, and that they're having a conversation around what they researched and what they learned, rather than just reading it rotely and keeping that audience in mind that's going to listen to their creation. So jumping ahead a little bit, the second disposition was engaging across contexts. This was kind of derived out of Sarah's work with her middle school language arts students. A great quote from the chapter: "By engaging across various contexts, learners immerse themselves in a collection of voices that can not only cultivate different perspectives, but also foster critical thinking and decision-making with support of outside resources, becoming more adept at engaging across the context they will cross in their lives." So kind of like how I fostered those opportunities to reflect and consider audiences online, Sarah has done the same with jumping across different contexts, giving them a safe space with mentorship to do that at the classroom level and beyond the classroom level, really, so that when they are out there in the real world, they're able to have more comfort and deftness to do that. So Sarah is an 8th grade language arts teacher, and she fosters a Genius Hour style workshop. Hayworth is a small rural community where she teaches. She phrased in the chapter how many kids kind of have the idea of how to play school and know how to play the game, but kind of getting beyond the classroom walls is really what she was looking for, making those educational experiences more meaningful. And so she allows the students to design individualized inquiry projects based around something they're genuinely passionate about. And as far as engaging in these projects, there should be some sort of a civic engagement thread to it, some way that they're impacting the school or the community or beyond, some sort of good that comes out of it. So they do research, they have questions that they're building, they find credible sources, but she also connects them with a real mentor, an actual person. Sometimes they meet in person, oftentimes it's through video chat, much like what we're using tonight, to extend that collaboration and allow them to kind of wear different hats, to assume different identities, participate in different actual discourses around those passions. And so an example of that was Peyton, who she writes about in the chapter, who was genuinely interested in becoming a graphic designer someday. And the project that she built that was able to benefit the school was that their school mascot logo was pretty outdated and she wanted to redesign it. So Sarah connected her with someone who was actually working in the graphic design field. And the expert that she worked with actually worked alongside with her and kind of showed her some of the ropes of how to go about redesigning. And so she was able to engage in the context of graphic design with a mentor and be able to put an actual product out at the end of that design process that the school could benefit from. And there was an actual authentic purpose to it. Anna, is there anything you wanted to add that I may not have mentioned about Sarah's part of the chapter?
No, I think it's that idea. I liked how you used the word deft there, deftly.
Yeah.
I don't like the word skill, but it's this like skillfully or easily being able to move across, talk to a working graphic artist, and then turn around and talk to her peers, right? About the same subject. Turn around and talk to the parent group to be able to share this out. Turn around and talk to the school administration, right? This idea that she can move across these different spaces and she feels this ease at it, that she's not just doing a great project and meaningful project, but she's also building that confidence and competence to move across these different spaces with ease. And that's what we do now. We've always done, but again, those flows really.
Yes.
We're doing that much more often, or there's this context collapse.
I'm going to go ahead and turn my share off so that you can
Sure.
have control again, if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah, and while we do that, if there's any other questions or comments too.
I'm going to put the link for Vocaroo in the chat so that everybody has it.
Oh, I think she already did that.
Okay. Yep, she did.
Okay, so we're just going to give our final example of the last disposition that we talk about in the chapter, and this is from some of the work that Robin Seglem and I have been doing in an alternative school that serves middle school and high school students. And a real key interest that the youth had at the school was looking to change the narrative about who they are and what their school is all about. These are all students, for one reason or another, had to leave their local neighborhood schools and often have had negative experiences with the schooling system in that moving from a local school to an alternative school. So oftentimes when we meet students who become part of the group that we've been working with, they feel disillusioned with the schooling process, with people being advocates for them, and then because they're in a space, they're making an effort to be at an alternative school, they then get this added stigma about being at an alternative school and being an alternative kid, which just compounds this the experience that they were having about who they were in the world. They would say, okay, I'm here trying, and so because I'm here now, I'm doubly labeled as not just a trouble kid, but then an alternative kid has to be in this space. And so one of our interests in that youth identified in wanting to do is to really feel more empowered and feel like they could change their space there. So we were working on some collaborative activities that we'll share in just a minute, that we hoped would foster what we're calling hospitable dialogue. And did I put that on the, maybe I skipped a slide here. So yeah, here we go. So hospitable dialogue is if you think about hospitality, if somebody's coming into, a hotel, there might be a hospitality specialist who really makes you feel welcome, who really makes you, it leads you into the space and makes you fit in that space. And so an idea of a cosmopolitan disposition is this idea that when we're in dialogue with other people, we want to take a stance that's hospitable to what people might mean and intend. But it needs to be a critical hospitality, because we've already talked about trolls and bots and all the other things, where we need to be really thoughtful about leaving an openness to possibilities, but also thoughtfully doing so. So to listen to someone in a hospitable sense implies a thoughtful openness to possible meanings in a pluralist sense, and an acknowledgement that we can't assume what to expect in terms of others' reactions and intentions. So to be a hospitable reader, writer, viewer online is to tolerate the discomfort that it takes if we're honestly engaging with another around trying to be understood and to understand someone. And if we're doing that honestly, it can be uncomfortable, it can take a while, there can be bumps along the road, but that's that sense of a thoughtful or critical openness. So going back to this slide, we used, I think it's Mike Wesch's Anth 101.
Yep, I put a link in the chat to it.
Thanks.
Yep.
So that's his course called Anthropology for Everyone. If you haven't heard of him, go to that site. It's really fun. He has these 10 challenges that can be like an Anthropology 101 course for people. And he invites you to do these 10 challenges and really think about what it means to be with other human beings. And so while we were doing these activities with these young people, we were really hoping to foster critical openness with other people, and by helping us empathetically experience and reflect on other people's experiences. But we also, as we worked with these young people, we really realized that comes along with also building our capacities and our desires to make space for ourselves, along with other people. That this hospitality is actually a dialogue, it's actually a reflexive activity itself. So I think you'll get it as we go dive a little bit more. So one of the activities is talking to strangers. This is an activity where he challenges you to go outside and talk to someone you've never, on the street, right? Just go up to somebody and open a conversation. This is something that I am incredibly uncomfortable with myself. We've done it a number of times now, and we'll take a couple, 2 or 3 youth and one of the adults will walk around the neighborhood, and we've pitched it as, this is our neighborhood. We're students from this local school. We want to understand. Gosh, what was the opening question this year? Trying to think what the opening question was, but it's a very basic story. Like, what's your story? And sometimes people don't want to talk to you and brush it off and leave in a rude, but man, when there are also times these conversations that open up these floodgates. And what really was happening over and over and over again and engaging with this, talking to a stranger, or in this case, it was talking to a neighbor. These are people who worked around the school where their alternative school was. They really recognize commonalities they didn't know they had. So people who worked in the office building across the street thought this alternative school was a bunch of trouble kids, right? The kids in the alternative school thought these were all just a bunch of corporate nonsense people across the street. And they really started these conversations that some have continued. There is a podcast that students started called Speaking Alternatively. They were just getting off the ground. They're going back to interview some of these people for the podcast, in talking about life experiences that they didn't know they would have. One police officer that we talked to, I would say he looked intimidating to me when we walked up. He had tattoos down his arms. He didn't really look like he wanted to talk to us at all. But man, he just immediately, they said, "What's your story?" And he says, "I love dogs." And he just went into why he's a police officer, because he loves dogs. And then the conversation started from there. So this was a challenge that actually was a literal hospitable conversation. So I'm going to talk to someone. I don't think I'm going to connect with this person, but I'm going to be welcoming to what that they're going to say, and this back and forth and kind of working through that negotiation. And the youth really came away feeling empowered from those conversations and feeling like they really wanted to do more than just go talk to people. They wanted to, and this was one of the students talked about it this way. He said, he's like, I felt more human after that conversation. I want us to help other people feel more human too, because I have a stereotype of them. I get stereotyped, but they do too. So this is kind of I guess the mission statement. The preface to the mission statement the youth were putting together after having this experience, where he goes into, we have a perception problem. We give back to our community and we strive to live up to the promise of worthy of the world we're inheriting. We believe in acta non verba, deeds not words, deeds that will forge a future as strong as the bonds between us. And so he talks about how although we have a perception problem of us, we want to actually go do something in the world to change this perception of us and other people. And he gets into, at the end, in Spanish, a light bulb is called foco. It is my hope that this initiative will shine light on the true side of people here and elsewhere. This idea of helping each other become, in a sense, more human. So this activity of talking to strangers, which is something that we did with this youth group, turned into this idea of what kind of projects could we do to humanize ourselves and to humanize others, but then also ourselves. And that we need to be advocates for ourselves at the same time and change the perceptions that are out there. So this it turned into a podcast, this turned into a website, this turned into a movement they were talking about. Just to give you a couple other examples of ways that students were thinking about hospitality, there's one of his other Anthropology 101 activities is making the familiar strange. So you take something that you think you know, right? You think really closely about it and see it in a new light, try to see it in a new light. So they said, oh, we know school. So they did a series of school photos, they did some photo essays and collages, and then really started to say, what do we want the school to actually look like if we had some say in this? And started to advocate for themselves. They now have murals up and down the walls, beautiful murals, instead of the white walls that were there before, with some motivational posters that they didn't find very motivational, but they now have murals up and down the wall. They realized they don't have a school library. All the schools that they came from had great libraries that they could go in and read, but there was no library here. So they started an effort to collect books. They created little bookshelves in lots of the different rooms. So they have a school-wide library, which is kind of like those free libraries that you can just take a book and put it back. So they got donations from around the community, reached out to that and created their own libraries within the school. And then the last example from Wesh's activities is called word weaving. And this is where you take a word and you try to add it into your life and use it more often. They came up with the phrase be alti, being alternative is actually a very positive thing. We can be alternative in our lives. The group this year, I think, is adapting the hashtag. So we'll see if BLT continues to live on. But for this group, they started to create some art that they put out with that hashtag across media. They started to talk to students within other schools and other spaces about taking on this kind of like a prize space of how are you alternative? And how can you, what does that mean for you? So across these different kinds of activities, again, going back to that idea that we're not just starting to be hospitable to others, but learning how to be, to create space where our expressions and our thoughts are also being, people are also treating us hospitably ourselves. I think that's, yeah. So any questions about those projects? I see some things in the chat I haven't been able to catch up or keep up with. Is there anything that I should catch up with there? Or questions about hospitality?
There's just kind of a lot of it was commentary around that this type of activity could very easily be adapted to, you know, as far as the kindergarten level. Just especially the idea about having conversations with others that you might not otherwise have, or find that you could have any sort of relatability to. And that's part of the grand ethos of cosmopolitanism in the first place. So I was happy to see some of the elementary friends chiming in about that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to talk about, right, that this was a high school group that are, many of them are 18 or above, right, that already, we didn't need to scaffold this kind of experience in any other kind of way.
Yeah.
Which I would in a different context, in a different setting. One activity we've done in another space that's like this is we had them map neighborhoods and then get to know their neighborhood in a new light and through a new light, and then redraw that neighborhood once they've met some more people within their neighborhood. And so you can always you can choose the others that they're talking to. They don't have to be strangers to the teacher, right? They can be, right? So this idea of can be adapted in lots of different ways.
Vanessa had a question. She says, I like what you said about asserting identities and perspectives to counter the stigmas and assumptions others brought to them. Can you talk more about this?
Yeah. I think that's part of this last, I went over very briefly because I was noticing the time, but that idea of word weaving, this idea of be alti, that taking up this being alternative as a badge of honor and feeling pride in the fact that they are making these extra efforts to make it through a school system that has otherwise failed them. Taking on that identity and asserting that in the world, and being more comfortable with being advocates for themselves. That these kinds of activities that provide opportunities to engage with other people in these new ways, on and offline, really help students. They would tell us they really felt more comfortable with being advocates for themselves. I hope that answers your question, but that's really where the power was in those moments.
Well, I want to thank the two of you for taking your time to share your expertise with us. I'm walking away with new tech tools, new ideas, wondering how I can implement these things at all levels. So I hope that everyone, I know that everyone here is walking away with something too. So thank you so much. And thanks to everybody. Hopefully I'll see you next week, where we're going to talk about fostering original thinking in the classroom. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.